Well, today in the Dáil Leaders' Questions, I challenged Leo Varadkar to respond to the magnificent protests of the Take Back the City group who've been occupying scandalously empty property while the homelessness crisis spirals out of control, and indeed to respond to the plans for the enormous national protest that we hope will be taking place here at the Dáil on the 3rd of October to demand emergency measures to deal with the spiralling housing and homelessness crisis. And in particular, I asked him to condemn the heavy-handed and violent policing tactics used by private security and the Guards against the Take Back the City protesters, and asked him, why does the government persist in policies which are about handing over land, property, assets, tax breaks to property speculators, to vulture funds and to landlords, which are actually making the housing crisis worse rather than providing the public and affordable housing we need on public land, rather than using the empty properties which exist in thousands out there to house people, rather than stopping evictions that are leading people into homelessness. As usual, we just got waffle and deflection from Leo Varadkar defending the indefensible. No solutions there. So I just think the lesson is straightforward. Let's keep up the protests, let's keep up the occupations, and let's have a massive protest here at the Dáil on October the 3rd to demand really radical emergency measures to deal with the human misery that is affecting tens and tens of thousands of families in this country because of the housing crisis. October the 3rd, the National Housing and Homelessness Coalition, the Congress of Trade Unions, housing NGOs such as Peter McVerry, Simon, Focus, housing activist groups such as Take Back the City and many others are calling for a major national demonstration here at the Dáil to demand emergency measures to deal with the spiralling housing crisis. Those protests follow what I believe to be the magnificent protests of mostly young people in the Take Back the City movement who have occupied scandalously empty properties that could be used for housing to highlight that obscenity of people suffering homelessness while residential property or property that could be used for housing lies scandalously empty. By intense frustration at your government's continued policy on relying on speculators, vulture funds and corporate landlords to solve a housing crisis that those very people created in the first place. They are saying, stop selling public land to vultures and speculators, start an emergency programme to build public and affordable housing on public land, introduce rent controls, adopt robust, aggressive measures to go after empty residential property where there is no justification for that property sitting empty, to house those that need housing, to stop evictions into homelessness. Nobody should be evicted into homelessness, and to establish a constitutional right to secure and affordable housing. That your policies have failed to address the deepening housing crisis, that maybe you might listen to the demands of those protesters. Will you condemn the use of violence, actual violence, not threatened violence, actual violence against wholly peaceful protesters, some of whom were hospitalised with concussion, cuts, bruises, had to get stitches as a result of the violence of hooded Garda and private security who used excessive violence against peaceful protesters? Yes, the government should build public housing, as you say, but your own department's figures, which I looked at to refresh myself last night, show that between 2011 and 2018, your governments have built 2,827 council houses. In the same period, the housing list has gone from 96,000 families to 136,000 families when you include transfer lists. When you include transfer lists of HAPS and RAS, which is massaging the figures, Minister Murphy, 136, and the number of people in emergency accommodation has quadrupled, and we have the shocking obscenity of children and families in growing numbers in emergency accommodation.
Over time, Deputy.
That is a policy that has failed, and unless you address it and stop with policies that continue to hand over billions in tax breaks, land, property, cash, as you're proposing to do again with the LDA, to private speculators and landlords, you will never solve this crisis. It will continue to get worse.